Welcome back to Foxy Cheating Tales, the channel where stories of betrayal, deceit, and heart-wrenching drama come to life. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for the ride. Tonight, we dive deep into the world of broken trust, and I have a tale so chilling it'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty. This is The Revenge of Richard, a story of a man who learned the hard way that sometimes love can turn into something far more dangerous. Part 1. Breaking Trust. My name is Richard. I have always believed that loyalty and trust are the foundation of any relationship. I have built my life on this principle: a successful career, a reliable social circle, and most importantly, Karen, my wife, my support, my love. We met at university and have been inseparable ever since. I thought our union could not be broken by anything or anyone. But one night changed everything. I came home later than usual, almost at midnight. It was strangely quiet, and there was an elusive tension in the air. When I walked into the bedroom, I felt my heart clench and my legs feel like cotton. Karen was sitting on the bed, and next to her, an unfamiliar man. He stood up quickly, buttoning his pants, and ran out of the room without looking back. I couldn't believe my eyes. My hands shook, but I couldn't look away. Everything in my head clenched into one lump. Karen stood, nervously fixing her hair, her eyes avoiding my gaze. I didn't know what to say, what to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't leave it at that. Richard, I can explain everything. Her voice sounded strange, insincere. But what could she explain to me? We'd been together for 10 years, we'd been through a lot, and now it turned out that I was just a convenient cover for her while she enjoyed it. I couldn't listen to her excuses. My emotions came out, but not in the form of a scream. I just stood up, turned around, and left for the other room. My thoughts were out of control. I knew her actions couldn't go without consequences. Revenge. I couldn't let her just get away with it. I wasn't just a husband, I was a man who valued his honor. She had destroyed everything I believed in, and now I was going to destroy her. But how? That night I made a promise to myself. I would take her down, not with anger, but with cold-blooded precision. The way I know how, as a lawyer, as a man who's used to handling situations. I will take my time. My revenge will be long, deliberate, and merciless. Part 2. Plans. The night passed in a blur. I lay in the dark, unable to sleep. My brain kept working, going over all the options. I knew I had to proceed carefully so she wouldn't notice I was up to something. My first rule was simple: don't show emotion, don't show pain. I had to remain cool and poised, as if nothing had happened. Outwardly, to everyone, I had to remain the Richard I was before. Karen tried to talk to me, to apologize, but I brushed it off. I couldn't let myself go back into that swamp of lies. I knew she would fight for me, but she didn't even realize that I had already lost all trust in her, and that was the only thing I could control: my attitude towards her. I held myself back. I didn't want to be aggressive. I didn't want to ruin everything right now. My revenge would take a long time. Karen, like any human being, made mistakes, and mistakes I knew could be used against her. I began to analyze how her life worked. Karen had always been open and honest with everyone but me. Her co-workers, friends, acquaintances. I knew she left traces everywhere. She shared a lot of things with other people without hiding her weaknesses and secrets. That was her mistake. All I had to do was tap into my resources and study her surroundings. There was nothing complicated about it. I started with work. I knew she spent a lot of time with co-workers, including the one with whom her cheating had come as such a shock to me. His name was Oscar. The man she ended up in bed with was her friend at work. The person she always had lunch with, the person she discussed projects and plans with. He wasn't just a coworker, he was a true friend. I already knew what I needed to do. Oscar was the key. He was my first sighting, but to strike, I had to wait. This whole situation had to develop gradually. The next morning, I went to the office. I wanted Karen to think things were getting back to normal. I kissed her on the cheek, asked her how her evening had gone, and told her that I would have a lot of work to do during the day. She was grateful for my calmness, for not yelling, not leaving, not making a scene. But as I already knew, I was only buying time by doing so. My game was just beginning. Part 3. Exploring and starting the game. Weeks passed in silent observation. Karen and I no longer talked about what had happened. Every day I went to work and she continued to live her life as if nothing had changed. It was as if we had become two different people living in the same house. And I knew that in her eyes I was just another convenient man with whom she continued to maintain the semblance of a normal relationship. I began to explore her, smoothly and cautiously. I knew I would need to take advantage of all her weaknesses, all her connections and secrets. She was too open to leave no trace, and I knew how to exploit that. The first step was to find out more about her connection to Oscar. I started following her work travels, paying attention to any time she stayed late at the office or disappeared for the weekend. Karen had never been secretive, and I knew that sooner or later she would give me all the evidence I needed on her own. She didn't suspect that I knew everything about her. I referred one of my colleagues to her company, a man I trusted. He knew several people in her entourage, and I asked him to ferret out a few details. It took a few weeks to gather all the information I needed. It turned out that Oscar wasn't just a colleague of hers. He was involved in several shady dealings that Karen didn't know about. This fact opened up new perspectives for me. One evening, I decided to take action. I invited Karen to a restaurant to talk. We sat in a quiet corner and she seemed calm, even a little relaxed, as if she had already forgotten what had happened between us. We hadn't discussed her cheating, and at that moment I decided that the hour of truth had arrived. "Karen, I need to tell you something," I began, not taking my eyes off her face. "I know what you've been doing. I know about Oscar." Her face went pale. She hadn't expected me to be so sure. "Richard, you don't understand." Her voice trembled. I continued, "You might think I don't notice, but I know everything, and I'm not going to forgive it, but I'm giving you a chance. You can choose to go on with your life like nothing happened, or you can watch me ruin your life the way you ruined mine." She fell silent. I knew she hadn't expected me to be so determined, but I hadn't been the type of person to just cry or beg for forgiveness for a long time. I was ready to go all the way. Part 4. Blackmail and Strategy. Karen tried to justify herself, but her words no longer mattered. I watched her lose confidence, her gaze growing more concerned with each passing second. She knew I could destroy her if I wanted to, and it was that sense of fear I wanted to see in her eyes. "You think I don't know about your affair with Oscar?" I continued, calmly watching her reaction. "You think I don't know that you betrayed me, not only in bed, but in the very essence of our marriage? But this is only the beginning. I'm going to make you lose everything you have." Her face grew even paler. She tried to say something, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. It was perfect. I could see her confidence crumbling as she realized she had nowhere to run. I couldn't just let her walk away. Now that I was sure that all I needed was time and precision, I decided I was going to make her life a living hell. Not for revenge, but to make her understand what real loss was. I decided to start with Oscar. He was a key element in her betrayal, and I was going to exploit his weaknesses. I called an old acquaintance of mine, a private investigator who could always find information that others were trying to hide. Within a few days, he had gathered everything I needed. It turned out that Oscar was in trouble with the IRA, was involved in stock market fraud, and was also connected to several unclean deals. I knew he had his dark sides, and now I was going to make them public. I sprang into action. First, I passed on information about his financial shenanigans to his competitors, who were happy to use it to damage Oscar's reputation. That was just the beginning. Soon, his accounting was under investigation, and his position in the company began to falter. Karen and Oscar had no idea that their personal lives were now in the hands of those who could turn it into a nightmare. Along with this, I created a network of rumors about her relationship with Oscar. I knew Karen would struggle to maintain her reputation, but I was going to make her face known not only as Richard's wife, but as the woman cheating on her husband with his coworker. Every conversation, every date we had was now part of the plan. I watched her reaction as she began to feel the consequences of her actions, but I knew it wasn't enough. I was going to go further. I was going to destroy her the way she had destroyed me. Part 5. The escalation of the game. I watched Karen as she tried to figure out what was going on. I saw how nervous she was when rumors of her affair with Oscar began to surface at her workplace. She became more and more withdrawn, her behavior changed. She started making excuses to her coworkers, trying to control the situation, but I knew her inner world was already crumbling, and it was all thanks to my strategy. However, I realized that it wasn't enough. My revenge had to be deeper. Karen had believed for too long that she could manipulate me, that her love and devotion could remain in the shadow of her deception. I was going to make her realize that she wasn't in control, and more importantly, that she had lost something more than just me. I decided to use her own weaknesses against her. Karen had always loved status, attention, high standing in society. She wasn't prepared for the consequences that her connection to Oscar would bring, and now I was going to destroy her social circle. I started with her close friends, the people who had always stood by her side, supported her. I started planting dubious rumors of her infidelity on them, providing them with material that seemed plausible. With each passing day, her entourage became more divided. Former friends with whom she often met began to avoid her. All of this was happening unnoticed, but Karen was gradually losing her support. But I didn't stop there. I began to influence her reputation in the professional world. I knew her work was an important part of her life, and I was willing to use every move she made to undermine her credibility. I began to communicate with her coworkers, intentionally denigrating her professional credentials, knowing, as I always do, that she wouldn't notice until it was too late. Every day her status at work became more precarious, her credibility threatened. At the same time, I was using her habit of openly sharing her thoughts with people to influence her relationship with Oscar. She didn't know that I was beginning to realize how her world was beginning to crumble, and it was increasingly falling under the influence of those who now knew her secrets. I knew that her cheating was only the first step to complete destruction. Karen was beginning to feel trapped. She couldn't understand why her life was falling apart, why her friends were turning away, why her co-workers were starting to avoid her, why her relationship with Oscar was becoming so strained. It was all happening gradually, but I knew that none of it would have gone unnoticed by her. However, the most interesting part was how she started trying to regain her position. She was trying to apologize to me, looking for ways to strengthen the relationship again. But I was already a different person. I didn't need her forgiveness. I wanted to see her lose everything she thought was important. Part 6. A vortex of devastating consequences. Karen was beginning to panic. She sensed that something was wrong but couldn't figure out what it was. She tried to regain control, but all she succeeded in doing was making things even worse. All her efforts were becoming futile, and I was enjoying it with cold, soulless precision. I already knew she was on the brink, and that moment was close at hand. When her colleagues started discussing her behavior behind her back, and Oscar suddenly disappeared from her life, she began to question herself. Not immediately, but she began to feel that her environment had become hostile. I knew it would take time for her to realize that her world would no longer be the same. She tried to get Oscar back, but he was already far away. I made sure his reputation was shaken as well. I convinced some of her mutual acquaintances that his behavior was unacceptable and that his personal problems were now her concern. It was another blow I dealt her without giving her a chance to regain any ground. When I noticed that she was beginning to lose confidence in her surroundings, I realized that now was the time. I decided to finish what I had started and finally put a stop to this hell. One evening, I invited her to another meeting. We met at the restaurant where we had once celebrated our anniversaries. She looked depressed, her eyes red from sleepless nights, her hands shaking as she tried to pour herself wine. It felt like a breakup, but I hadn't told her the main thing yet. "Karen, you don't even realize what happened, do you?" I asked, glancing at her. She was silent, nervously rubbing the napkin in her hands. "You thought I wouldn't notice your cheating and that things would stay the way they were? You were wrong." I was silent for a few seconds, watching her reaction. "Your life is falling apart because I'm destroying you. I destroyed your career, your environment, your reputation, and now when you look at me, you realize you can't get anything else back." Her face went pale and her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no pity. I couldn't even return that feeling if I wanted to. I'd driven her to the point where she'd lost everything: her friends, her job, her status, and even her Oscar. Everything she fought for, everything she thought was important, was jeopardized, and I knew she couldn't rise out of it. "You're no longer important to me," I continued. "You're no longer the woman I loved. I knew you would seek forgiveness, but it won't happen. You'll get nothing." Her face contorted with fear and despair, but I couldn't stop. With vengeance, I wasn't finished. I was just beginning. But I knew that this was the moment she would realize that her life would never be the same again. She now realized that her betrayal had turned into a disaster. I stood up and slowly made my way towards the exit without turning around. I knew she would be left there, alone, consumed with pain and disappointment, with the realization that I had won. And that was all I needed. Part 7. The Final Blow. After that meeting with Karen, I felt the tension drain away. Everything I had planned had already started to come true. She was on the edge of a precipice, and I knew her life would never be the same again. But I needed to take the final step, the one that would finally rob her of what she valued most. Over the next few days, as she struggled to recover, I continued to keep an eye on her. She began to seek support from old acquaintances, tried to rekindle her relationship with Oscar, but now all her attempts were doomed to failure. She was like a prisoner, surrounded by her mistakes. And in that moment, I realized that the real revenge wasn't just about ruining her life. It was actually much more subtle than that. I decided to reach out to her parents. She had always been proud of her family. Her father was a powerful man, and she had mentioned more than once how important his support was to her. It was her weakness. I knew that if I brought up her cheating in front of her family, it wouldn't just be a blow to her. It would be a blow to her dignity that she wouldn't be able to survive. I met with her parents under the pretense that I wanted to talk about her behavior, about what had happened between us. I told them everything I knew about her cheating, her relationship with Oscar, and how it affected our marriage. It was all laid out as if I was the victim, as if I was trying to maintain my honor. But Karen was incapable of holding on to her loyalty. Her parents were shocked, but I could see them beginning to doubt her. Her mother couldn't believe Karen could do such a thing, and her father, though he didn't say anything out loud, began to avoid her as if she was guilty. I knew it hurt her, and it was exactly what I wanted to see. When I got home, I saw her looking at me anxiously. She already knew what I had done, saw her world crumbling, saw her lose everything that seemed immutable. "You can't do this," she exclaimed, clawing at my hands. "Richard, please don't ruin everything. I beg you, you can forgive me." But I was already far from the man who had once loved her. There was no sincerity in her words, and I knew she no longer deserved forgiveness or pity. I pulled my arms out of her embrace and looked at her with cold determination. "You don't understand, Karen," I said, feeling the emotion recede, leaving only emptiness. "I didn't ruin your life. You ruined it yourself. And now you're going to watch it fall before your eyes, and I'm going to stand by, enjoying it." Her face flushed red with shame and disappointment. She couldn't believe this was happening. She couldn't believe that everything she believed in was being shattered. And in that moment, as her world fell apart, I realized that my revenge was complete. Now Karen was alone. No friends, no job, no support. Without me. Part 8. The Fall and the Last Encounter. Karen didn't try to fight anymore. She was exhausted. Her face had lost its former vibrancy. Her eyes had lost the sparkle that had once attracted me. Every step she took was now a step into the abyss, and she knew it. She could no longer hide her pain and fear. Everything I had created was now crashing down on her, and I watched her life fall apart like splinters. A few weeks passed. All Karen had left were the ruins of her former existence. Her job was ruined, her friends had turned away, her family was no longer supportive. She came to me one day as I sat at home, in silence, and quietly said, "Richard, you've won. You broke me. I lost everything I had." I couldn't contain my sense of satisfaction as I looked at her standing in front of me. She was utterly desperate, but that wasn't enough. I knew that now that everything was ruined, now that she no longer had a foothold, I could take one more step to finally break her. "Did you think I would forgive you?" I asked her without changing my facial expression. "Did you think I would be the one to turn on you like you turned on me? No, Karen. You don't deserve any more forgiveness or attention." She stood silently, her body as empty as a shell without substance. The tears didn't flow, they no longer had any power, and neither did her voice. She just stood there, not knowing what to say, realizing that her life was forever changed. I slowly stood up and walked over to her. "You have nowhere else to go. You're going to look at me from the moment I left and realize there's nothing you can do about it. I've taken everything you once loved away from you." She couldn't answer. All I wanted to hear, the screaming, the tears, the regret, didn't matter anymore. She'd lost the right to do that when she betrayed me. I turned around and walked toward the exit. When I was almost at the door, I heard her voice. It was a final, faint whisper. "Richard, I've lost everything." I stopped, but didn't look back. I knew her words wouldn't change what I'd done. I left her in that darkness, in her crumbling world, and walked away. And as I left the house, I realized that everything I'd built wasn't just revenge. It was redemption. Now, as I stood on the doorstep, I knew I had no pain left. Karen had lost everything she had, and I was no longer a part of her world. Wow, what a journey. The pain, the plotting, the destruction. It's a reminder that betrayal doesn't just break hearts, it can break lives. Richard may have gotten his revenge, but the question remains, was it worth it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have taken the same path, or is there a better way to handle betrayal? Thank you for watching Foxy Cheating Tales. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with those who love a good story of drama and deception. We'll be back with more shocking tales of love gone wrong. Until next time, keep your hearts guarded and your secrets even more so.